There's a specific mathematical point where a government stops asking for your money and starts taking it. When a nation hits this threshold, the rules of ownership change. Rome crossed it. They seized private property and melted down temple gold. Weimar crossed it. They printed marks until a lifetime of savings couldn't buy a loaf of bread. And in 1933, America crossed it. They made owning gold a crime punishable by 10 years in prison. The threshold is approximately 120% debt to GDP. We just crossed it again. The United States government is currently $38 trillion in debt. Interest payments alone now exceed the entire defense budget. The math says they can't pay it back. History says they won't even try. Instead, they are going to use the 6 weapons of confiscation. Let me show you the pattern. In 82 BCE, the Roman dictator Sulla walked into the forum with a math problem. Rome was broke. Decades of civil war had drained the treasury, the legions needed to be paid, and the grain dole needed to be funded. He didn't try to grow the economy. He didn't raise taxes on the poor. He posted a list. It was called the prescriptio, a literal list of names posted in the public square. If your name was on it, you weren't just an enemy of the state. Your property was forfeit. Soldiers went door to door. They didn't ask for contributions. They seized villas, gold, statuary, and slaves. Sulla raised 2.3 billion sesterces in a matter of months, enough to run the empire for years. He didn't fix the economy, he just ate the rich. This was the first time a Western government realized a dark truth. When the debt becomes mathematically impossible to pay, it is easier to steal than to govern. Weapon number 1 is the silent killer, currency debasement. Imagine you are a middle-class father in Berlin in 1921. You have worked for 30 years. You have saved 100,000 marks. It is sitting in a conservative government bond. It is enough to buy a comfortable house and retire. But the German government has war debts it cannot pay. So instead of defaulting, they print. They print so much that the price of coffee rises while you are drinking it. Waiters stand on tables every 30 minutes to announce the new prices. By November 1923, your 100,000 mark nest egg, which used to represent a lifetime of labor, cannot buy a daily newspaper. The government effectively taxed you 100%. They stole your retirement, your house, and your children's inheritance without ever sending a tax collector to your door. The US dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power since 1913. Real wages peaked in 1973. Weimar was a sprint. America is a marathon. The theft is identical. But sometimes inflation is too slow. Sometimes the government needs the assets now. That brings us to weapon number 2, direct seizure, and America has already pulled the trigger on this one. Meet Frederick Barber Campbell. In 1933, Frederick was a lawyer in New York. He was prudent. He didn't trust the banks, so he kept his wealth in physical gold. He had 5,000 ounces stored at Chase National Bank. It was his property. He had the receipts. Then, on April 5th, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. It made owning gold a crime punishable by 10 years in federal prison. Frederick went to the bank to withdraw his property. They refused. He sued. He argued that the Constitution protected private property from seizure without just compensation. The government responded by indicting him. Here's the detail that should terrify you. The legal justification they used was the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, a wartime statute designed to stop trade with Germany. World War I had been over for 15 years, but the emergency powers remained on the books. The judge looked Frederick in the eye and effectively told him that his gold was no longer his gold. It belonged to the Federal Reserve. The government forced him, and every other American, to turn in their gold for $20.67 an ounce. Then, 9 months later, they passed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 and raised the official price to $35 an ounce. Do the math. They forced you to sell at $20. Then they revalued it to $35. They stole 69% of the value of the nation's gold holdings in less than a year. Private gold ownership remained illegal for 41 years. They told your grandparents it was a temporary emergency measure. It lasted until 1974. Emergency powers never expire. They just wait. Weapon number 3 is the bail-in. This is the modern version of Sulla's list. Ask Christos in Cyprus. In 2013, Christos was a small business owner. He had saved for his daughter's wedding. His money was in Lakey Bank. The bank had made bad bets on Greek government bonds. It was insolvent. On a Saturday morning, Christos went to the ATM. It was frozen. A handwritten sign was taped to the glass. Closed. When the bank reopened 2 weeks later, the money was gone. The government had executed a bail-in. They seized 47.5% of all uninsured deposits overnight. They didn't call it theft. They called it a stability levy. They took his cash and replaced it with worthless equity in the failing bank. Christos wasn't a reckless investor. He was a saver. He lost nearly half his life savings to pay for the mistakes of bankers he had never met. If you think this is just a corrupt European problem, look at the paperwork. In 2014, the G20 nations, including the United States, agreed to make bail-ins the standard procedure for future bank failures. The FDIC and the Bank of England published a joint paper on it. Your savings account is not a vault. Legally, it is an unsecured loan to the bank. And if that bank fails, you are the creditor, they will stiff. Weapon number 4, capital controls. This is how they lock the doors before they start the fire. Ask a grandmother in Argentina in 2001. The Argentine government had borrowed too much in US dollars. They were facing default. They knew that once the news broke, everyone would rush to pull their money out of the banks. So they locked the exits first. On December 1st, the economy minister announced the corralito, the little corral. Overnight, cash withdrawals were limited to 250 pesos a week. People rushed to the banks. They banged on the metal shutters. They wept in the streets. It didn't matter. The computers were coded to reject them. Then came weapon number 5, forced conversion. Argentines who had saved in US dollars, specifically to protect themselves from their own government's incompetence, saw those dollars forcibly converted into pesos. The government set the exchange rate at 1.4 pesos per dollar. The real market rate was 4 pesos per dollar. The government stole 70% of their purchasing power with a single decree. They locked the exits. Then they burned the building down. Weapon number 6 is the one that should worry you the most right now. Pension nationalization. This is where they take the money you can't touch. Most Americans have their wealth trapped in 401ks and IRAs. You can't withdraw it without a penalty. It is a sitting duck. Look at Hungary in 2010. The government was facing a debt crisis. They looked at the $14 billion sitting in private pension funds, money that citizens had saved for decades. Our Prime Minister Viktor Orban gave the people a choice. Transfer your private pension savings to the state system, or lose your future state pension benefits entirely. It was a shakedown. Nice retirement you have there. Shame if something happened to it. $14 billion in private assets flowed into government hands overnight. Look at Poland in 2014. The government seized 36 billion euros in treasury bonds held by private pension funds, and they simply canceled the bonds to lower the national debt-to-GDP ratio. They didn't call it confiscation. They called it pension reform. Prime Minister Donald Tusk had stated months earlier, there is no way the state will take this money. Official denials are the dinner bell for confiscation. These happened in NATO countries in the 21st century. Drop a comment. Where are your retirement savings held right now? I want to see how concentrated this target really is. Now look at the United States. Where's the money? There's $35 trillion sitting in U.S. retirement accounts, 401ks and IRAs. There's another $17 trillion in bank deposits. That is over $50 trillion in wealth. It is concentrated. It is tracked digitally. It is held by institutions that follow federal orders. It is the perfect target. We are already seeing the proposals. Academics and policymakers are floating ideas for guaranteed retirement accounts. They are discussing mandatory treasury allocations. The mechanism will be subtle. They won't seize your 401k directly. They will pass a regulation requiring that 25% of all tax-advantaged retirement accounts must be invested in risk-free government bonds for your safety. If inflation is 8% and the bonds pay 4%, they are effectively taxing your retirement by 4% a year. They turn your nest egg into their piggy bank to fund the deficit. They won't send soldiers to your door like Sulla did. They will send a PDF from your HR department notifying you of a regulatory update. The pattern is consistent across 2,000 years. First, they debase the currency. Then, they deploy capital controls to stop you from leaving. Then, when the crisis hits, they seize. We have checked every box on the pre-confiscation checklist. Sustainable debt? No. We are adding $1 trillion in debt every 100 days. Political will to cut spending? No. Neither party will touch entitlements. Emergency powers active? Yes. The Trading with the Enemy Act is still law. Concentrated wealth pools? Yes. $50 trillion sits in accounts the government can regulate with a keystroke. The Romans who saw Sulla coming moved their wealth out of the city. The Germans who saw Weimar coming bought gold and farmland. The Argentines who saw the corralito coming moved their money to Miami or Zurich. The citizens who waited for an official announcement became victims. You can't stop the cycle. It is the math of empire. But you can refuse to be the collateral damage. The first step is realizing that the rules of ownership have already changed. You just did. If this satisfies anything, hit subscribe. Because the history they don't teach is the history that protects you. Position accordingly.